Hello and welcome to the WIHS Journal Public Affairs program. I'm Jerry Williams. Join me now for my conversation with John Ellsworth, founding director of the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum of Connecticut. That's happening now on the WIHS Journal. It's News and Public Affairs.
Well, actually, I was a public school teacher. I was a tech ed teacher, and I was asked to teach electronics along the way. And I didn't know a thing about it, but I learned quick. And I always liked collecting antiques and old stuff, so the two came together, and I started collecting old radios. Before I knew it, I had several hundred of them around the house, and I was an avid collector. And anytime we had guests over, they were just enthralled with these things. So I started to put on public displays at libraries and, display cases I could find. And they got great acclaim, so my wife and I at the time, we decided let's give it a try, and we were living in New Britain, so we rented a little hole-in-the-wall space in south end of Arch Street and opened up in September of 1990, and we set up what we called 5 decades of radios going from the 1920s on up, and people came. It was amazing to me that people had interest, and in the process we gained volunteers because people came and wanted to be a part of the museum, and so they started showing up and helping out. And the thing we did not predict was donations. And when I say that, most people get dollar signs in their heads, but it wasn't dollar signs, it was stuff. Everybody had grandma's old radio up in the attic. They had no idea what they're going to do with it, but it was too sentimental to throw out, and now there's a museum they could give it to. So there were actually times where I couldn't get into the building because stuff was piled up so high in front of the door. And so now our display, we have over 4,000 square feet on display, and 99% of it is all donated over the last 33 years. So it's grown out of proportion. It's unbelievable.
So you started in 1990 in New Britain, and you moved from New Britain to Windsor what year?
Not directly. We were in New Britain for a year and a half. That magic number of a year and a half kept popping up on us. And the collection had grown so much, we were splitting the seams of the building, and the landlord politely asked us to get out. We had it closed for a couple of years, and then we looked around to open up again, and East Hartford had a possibility of 1,600 square feet of space, and we moved in there, set up the space, and they sold the building in a year and a half. We had to get out again. We moved up the street to an old IHOP building, which was 2,200 square feet of space, which had the for sale sign out front when we moved in. A year and a half later, it sold, and it was gone. And so we went to the town, and they said, yeah, we got the Town Hall Hardware building, which was down next to the highway, and that was 5,000 square feet of space. And so we moved in there. Beautiful situation, but it was very, very close to the highway, and a year and a half later, the state decided to widen the highway, and the building had to go. So we were out on the street again, but what we didn't realize, the state wanted to compensate us for kicking us out of the building, and we had to get a quote as to how much it would cost to move the collection, and when the quotes all came back in, the cheapest quote was $32,000. We had already moved all the other previous times ourselves, so I went to the state and I said, if we move ourselves, do we get to $32,000? They said, oh, yeah, you betcha, and you got to change all your advertising and everything, so we'll add another $10,000 to that. Wow. So long story short, by getting kicked out of that building, we had capital enough to get involved a little bit more seriously in a building. That's when Windsor came in, and we were in the Rappaport building, which was a huge 86,000 square foot complex across the way over there. Again, we were there for about a year and a half. The developer that was in charge of developing the building got kicked out by the owner, and the owner called me one night and said, what's the story about this museum in my building? And I told him, and he was quite intrigued, and he called me back a couple nights later. He says, why don't you buy the building? Well, this is a huge complex, but I talked to the town, and the town said, he's owned it for years, made millions off of it. He's old. He wants out from underneath it. They said, offer him $100,000 for the building. I said, you're crazy. This is a multi-million-dollar complex. They said, do it. And so I did, and he said, you bet, and I'll take the mortgage back. So we went from being a tenant kicked around to owning this humongous building, which we spent 5 years trying to find a developer who would condo with us, and none of them would. So we went back to the town. We were kind of blocking the last redevelopment of downtown Windsor. And we said, this isn't working. Do you have another building? And this 115 Pearson Lane popped up. We parlayed the other building into this building, purchased this building for $600,000, took out a $400,000 mortgage with the owner who was selling it to us, and we now have it down to under 140,000. We're almost paid off.
Nice. If you're just tuning in, I'm with founding director of the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum of Connecticut, John Ellsworth. Talk about the genesis of radio, how it all began.
And that's what we show out on our floor. We have a timeline on the floor, and it basically developed out of a lot of other previous technologies. We have Victrolas out there, and a lot of the horn speakers on the Victrolas were later used by the radios. But first it was telegraph, hardwired telegraph, and they were sending signals back and forth through the wire, and then they discovered that they could create a spark and the same signal would pass through the air. And that was called wireless telegraphy because it wasn't modulated. It was just a dot and dash type of thing. And then it was in 1906 that Fessenden figured out how to modulate the signal and carry voice and music. That was the advent of radio, basically, when it started carrying voice and music wireless through the air. And it just developed from there. First radio station went on the air in 1920, KDKA, which is in Pittsburgh still today, still existing. FM developed in the late 20s, early 30s by Edwin Howard Armstrong, and that brought in another whole aspect to radio. So you had the AM signal, you had the FM signal, and went on from there.
Talk about some of the unique pieces that you have here that thrills you.
Oh, boy. That's hard because we have so many of them.
I know.
Like I said, we have 4,000 square feet on display, and we have behind what we call the wall, there's another 7,000 square feet primarily dedicated to storage to the rafters. But we do have some very, very rare pieces. I just mentioned Edwin Howard Armstrong, who invented FM, and he also invented an early AM system called super heterodyning, and we have one of his prototypes on display that never went into production. There were other models that were derived from that. Those went into production. So we're 99% sure. We have pictures of Edwin Howard Armstrong with his hands on the radio that we have, and we're 99% sure it's the same radio. So that's a special piece right there.
Yeah. What can you tell me about ham radio?
Well, we have a ham station here, W1VCM. In fact, today is field day, and in a matter of less than an hour, they're going to start transmitting back and forth, and everybody all over the world is doing the same thing, and they see how many contacts they can make. But we have a whole club. There's 30-some-odd gentlemen, or ladies and gentlemen, actually, in the club, and they run the station that's here on the floor. And when people come through for a tour, they will demonstrate how ham radio works. A lot of people think this is a dying art, but it's not, because these guys are imperative when it comes to major disasters, like when Katrina hit New Orleans, and everybody said, "Oh, I still got my cell phone in my pocket." Well, it doesn't work when the cell phone tower is laying flat on the ground from the storm. So the amateur radio guys will flock to those areas with their portable units and set up the first line of communications to start the rebuild of the territory and get it going. So they are very, very important. One of the things my guys do whenever we had the marathons in the area, they are along the course in the marathon. People don't think about this. Okay, send people off and have them run 26 plus miles. And what if one of them drops of a heart attack halfway there? Is there anybody there to help them out? Yes, the hams are there. They've got them situated along the whole course. They got their portable radios, so if anything bad happens, they can call an ambulance, call an EMT immediately, and that's the service they provide.
Folks, it's a pretty cool place. I feel like I've been thrust back in time by way of flux capacitor.
That's right, Marty.
Marty, great Scott.
Yeah.
So you got to come and check it out. The location, days and hours of operation are?
Well, we are one of the hidden gems. We're getting a reputation for the hidden gems. But, we're open Thursday and Friday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. We're open Saturdays, our long day, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sundays from 1 to 4 p.m. A lot of people come in and think they're going to spend 20 minutes and get bored and be out of here. And as you saw with the group I had, tours average about 3.5 hours at least. So provide a lot of time for yourselves. We have a website. It's our initials, vrcmct.org. We're at 115 Pearson Lane in Windsor, which is in the historic section of Windsor, just north of Farmington River. Easy to find. There's signs on the road.
I'm not going to hold John any longer. Literally pulled him off a tour, and he was gracious enough to give me a little time. You have a Hall of Fame of broadcasters on the
Yep.
wall there. I see Brad Davis is on there, Denise DeCinzio,
Yep.
Bob Steele,
Yep.
John Ramsey. I mean, the list is long. It's like a pyramid of different folks and
Right.
who made an impact over the years. And some are still here, some are not. Keep doing what you're doing. He's John Ellsworth of the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum of Connecticut, 115 Pearson Lane in Windsor, Connecticut. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
If you would like more information about what you heard today, call WIHS 860-346-1049, 860-346-1049. It's the WIHS Journal, News and Public Affairs.